Welcome to another episode of the Lords of Consciousness podcast. I am your host, Clint Culberson, and I am co-hosted today with Richie Jones. Richie, how are you? Oh, hold on, Richie, you aren't even plugged in. Goodness gracious.
Jeez, Clint. I mean, how can I be heard without What's up, LOC?
Technical difficulties all around, but hey, man, this is what happens when you run an internet show. Today, we are joined by a guest that's near and dear to Richie and me because his books have made specifically one of his books, Future-Esoteric, has made a huge impact on our lives. And we wanted to reach out to him to make sure, just to talk to this guy who's created such a masterpiece. Mr. Brad Olsen. Brad, how are you doing today?
Hey, guys, I'm doing great. Thanks for the kind words.
Yes, and Brad, you're out of San Francisco, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
No, Cal. Is that where you grew up, or what's your history?
No, I grew up in the Midwest, a suburb of Chicago, Arlington Heights, Illinois, to be specific.
Excellent. And then how long have you been out in Cali?
About half my life now.
Yeah?
I moved out here in my mid-20s. I'm now 50, so you do the math.
Well, it's funny because Richie, who's my co-host here, he just moved out to Arizona 2 months ago, and him and I have been friends for a couple years. But he moved out here to start this media site that we're doing called lordsofconsciousness.com. And when he first got here, one of the first things he did was whipped out all his books and showed them to me, and he said, Clint, this is the book you're going to read first. We were looking at all sorts of goodies, and he goes, this is it. And it was the book Future-Esoteric.
All right.
And, written by you. And Richie shared this book with me, Future-Esoteric. And it's a book that I wish I could have, it's like you defined my heart, like the mission that I've been after, and you go into such depth in terms of explaining the control conspiracy that has taken place on this planet. I mean, that's literally affected every single person, whether they know it or not. And then you've gone into such great detail in terms of explaining, the extraterrestrial question and how we actually know way more than we're led on to. It's not just hey, do you think ETs exist? There's so much more information and actual, real, legit evidence out there, going into this topic. And my favorite part of your book, though, is how you bring it full circle in terms of where do we go from here. You create there's a section that's about the utopia and explaining exactly what kind of solutions already exist on this planet. Not some, whimsical ideas, but stuff that's already here on the planet that people are practicing, maybe secretively. I mean, in terms of, especially as we'll get into free energy and things like that. But there are solutions, and you spell it out really well. So real quick, you started off as a travel writer. Then you kind of dived into books explaining sacred sites around the world, North America, Europe, and the entire world. You've traveled extensively, from what I understand, and then you've really gotten into this other realm, as you've described in so many other podcasts. How the travel industry kind of became a tougher industry when the internet came around, but you've kind of dived into one of your great passions, which has been the esoteric, the history of humankind, and really what exactly is happening on this planet. And you've what a deep dive you've done.
Well, to get to the point of producing both of the esoteric guides was certainly a process, and the travel segment of my life. 3 years I left the country. I was an English teacher in Japan, and then I wrote my first book actually while I was traveling, called World Stompers, a global travel manifesto, which is still in print, and basically got my feet wet traveling around the world, which to me was like as good, if not a better education in life than my 5 years in college. So it really opened up the world to me to see things such as extreme poverty, to traveling to the greatest monuments of humanity and getting a good close-up view of what it's like to be immersed in many different cultures successively and without coming back. It was quite an experience. And so when I did come back, that's when I moved to San Francisco, and I started my publishing business, CCC-Publishing, which is based on this warehouse, which in another turn of what I do for a living, I also am the founder and creator of this event called the How Weird Street Fair. Wearing a shirt here.
Nice.
And we just did our 17th annual event a few weeks ago, which was a real big hit, about 27,000 people dancing in the streets of San Francisco.
Nice. Wow.
So I have this dual profession, one producing this event, and I'm also an illustrator in my books and all the posters for How Weird, and I always put an alien and a UFO in all the posters. Subtle programming, just seeding some ideas into the world. But really what I do year-round is book publishing and writing, and then also publishing other authors' books. And I have this new author out of Italy named Lyons Agami, and he's doing very esoteric material, which segues very nicely into my series. And that's what I do.
That is so
That's
cool,
what I got
man.
here.
You're creating kind of like a little X-Men group of authors who are kind of, deep diving with you on all the different topics, and kind of, I haven't looked into his books yet. I've heard about him, but it seems like, would you say that with the authors that you work with, that you're trying to, is there like a bigger picture to all the books combined, the whole portfolio from you as a publisher?
Absolutely. I really cannot publish all the requests I get. Many I have to gracefully decline. I pick books that are in the series and in the subject matter that I'm already doing. And Leo's books are great because he talks about the dark side of the esoteric, which is interesting to me, but is not really my passion. I write on the lighter side of issues. I'm not going to shy away from the dark side, but he comes from it. He comes from one of these Illuminati families, and he's right there in Rome. Yeah. So he's seeing everything that's going on with the Vatican, a lot of news that we never get over here. But so it's great to work with Leo pretty much on a daily or weekly basis. We're in touch with each other, and we got his Confessions of an Illuminati Volume 2 just came out right now, and so I'm getting those review copies out, as well as the second edition of Future-Esoteric just came out.
Wow. So
got
exciting,
a lot on my
man.
Yeah,
I'm
it's all
finding
good.
that with so many different people out there, there's a humongous collaboration that's happening. We're finding, and you described this in your book in terms of finding the others, as Terence McKenna would say, finding those who are out there, who are, you're kind of like your soul tribe family in a way. And even above and beyond that, even with the work that you're doing, collaborating with someone from Italy, who can read in Italian and who can decipher what that information is. And we have a content creator from England and from Canada, and these are the kind of we want to show stories of people that are being the solutions out there. And what a cool picture we get when we get it from around the world, and the internet, thank goodness, has enabled us to connect like this. And there's whistleblowers all over the world now who are connecting in all the different countries, and it's so vital. You talked about how you focus more on the light, but there's definitely, in this book, Future-Esoteric, you must, it was required of you to kind of paint the picture of actually how dark it really is. out
Yeah.
there, and what a nightmare, as you've explained in your book. It's a nightmare worse than your worst nightmares times a million. It goes very deep in terms of what kind of control has been placed on us. And I wanted to I just want to set the intention for this interview that you go into some very deep topics, but I really would like to try to pull from you a kind of Future-Esoteric 101 in terms of explaining to those who might just be on the cusp or just of seeing this and understanding that maybe there is something afoot. Maybe there really is something going on. Before it was looked at as just conspiracy theory and so on and so forth, but people are starting to, I think on a mass scale, really not trust governments and see that there's something else going on. And so I wanted to start with a quote from your book, okay? And it's hard to absorb the enormity of the big lie until you know it personally. It is the greatest story never told. The extent to which humanity is being massively manipulated can be overwhelming. How can anyone conclude the objective truth about anything in life anymore? We know corporations lie to us. We know governments lie to us. We know the media lies to us. Who can we trust? Yet we can liberate ourselves once we start breaking through the fog, once we begin to penetrate the maze and start to get it. But this requires undertaking a real re-education. The other option is to passively allow the programming of our minds to accept a predetermined version of reality that the elite would like us to have. Beautiful quote. So can you describe your own journey into discovering this big lie?
Sure. I think we've all had a pretty good sense that things are not quite right, even from the time we were kids, but certainly as we start using critical thinking skills into our adulthood. And this was certainly evident to me when I started traveling the world and seeing how things are from the other side, from the other perspective that we really never hear about here in this country. I mean, we don't even really hear about what the homeless have to deal with every day. It's survival, really. And so many people are like this around the world. So it really opens your mind to what a lot of people, 90% or more, are dealing with on a daily basis. And this is how I started to coalesce this idea of an alternative narrative, that we're given a certain amount of information in our lives through school, through the media, through the government, that shape the way they want us to think and what they want us to believe. But when you get into what the real definition of esoteric is, and the esoteric to me is defined as a view of reality, existence, and purpose that has been designed for and understood by a specifically initiated secret group alone, one that requires or exhibits knowledge that is restricted to this small group and is difficult for those outside of the group to understand. So what I really took upon myself was to try to find out what this alternative narrative is. And I think innately we all realize that there is a lot that we have not been told, and there really is a little old man behind the curtain. So to draw that curtain back and see who this is, then we start to see a new esoteric reality, which will be quite divergent from the establishment reality that has been comprised of the big lies that we have been fed for well over a century. Never forget that the false narratives and the covert propaganda are simply meant to keep the masses in line on behalf of and to the benefit of the establishment. So when we can finally see that a lot of things just aren't right, all of these topics, which I then put into chapters and sections in both of my esoteric guides, start to really come to a fore. And when we start to see that everything is fake in our society, or at least a great many things are, our world is just filled with an extraordinary amount of lies, deception, disinformation, misinformation, fakery, fraud, facades, mirages, half-truths, propaganda, and brainwashing. And as I bring into...
It's like one big opposite day.
Yeah, well, it's also very evident when we examine the UFO and the ET truth embargo, and that's what I bring to a fore in the esoteric guides, especially Future-Esoteric.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Future-Esoteric is book number 2 because it does have a forward-looking view, hence the name. Book number 1, which we'll have to talk about another time, is called Modern Esoteric.
It's next on my list. I'm going in reverse order.
Well, I'll hook you guys up with a copy at Contact in the Desert.
Oh, thanks, dude. You're the man.
And Modern Esoteric really starts from the beginning and gets into the antediluvian civilizations of humanity, into the secret societies and mystery schools, and brings us up to this modern age. We're Future-Esoteric then, as you mentioned in the setup, gets into the secrets is one section, the ET cosmos section, I call it, and then into utopia, forward-looking views that we can use as a model moving forward.
I love it, man. I love it. And I wanted to kind of actually follow that model, kind of go through the book in terms of those 3 pillars. And right now, I want to focus on the secret, the big lie that we just described. And I just want to read 3 quotes that you have in there from very famous people. This one's from President James Garfield, who was assassinated a few weeks after making this statement that I'm about to say. Whosoever controls the volume of money in any country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. And when you realize that the entire system is very easily controlled one way or another by a few powerful men at the top, you will not have to be told how periods of inflation and depression originate. The next one is from world-renowned, super duper smart guy, Noam Chomsky. He says the general population doesn't know what's happening, and it doesn't even know that it doesn't know. And God, that is powerful. And if you're out there listening to this, it's okay. There's most of my life I was in this particular general population that he's talking about, and it's only within the last couple of years for my own self, and I know Richie too, and Brad you've kind of been at this longer, and you've seen it. But the third quote comes from President Abraham Lincoln. The money powers prey upon the nation in times of peace and conspires against it in times of adversity. The banking powers are more despotic than monarchy, more insolent than autocracy, more selfish than any bureaucracy. They denounce as public enemies all who question their methods or throw light upon their crimes. Brad, can you kind of explain for those who don't really understand how the banking system has created a system that's enslaved us? Some people might think, what are you talking about, dude? Explain it.
That's a great question, Clint. And really, that's why we start Future-Esoteric with a section called Secrets, and how the fiat money system is so integral to maintaining that the core secret that is held among the elite. And that is because money controls everything. And when you can just create money out of thin air, as they do at the Federal Reserve, this fiat money based on nothing except for our perception that it holds value, well, you got humanity under your control, because everybody needs money to do everything. Even if you go to some very primitive places around the world, they still want to get money. And so what has happened here, and this is the great tragedy in America, we have in our Constitution that only the Treasury is meant to mint coin and create paper currency, but that system got hijacked in the year 1913 with the creation of the Federal Reserve. And if you notice, on every single bill in your wallet in America, there are Federal Reserve notes. That means a privately held banking consortium has control of our money system. Okay, and just let that sink in for a second. Private bankers, accountable to no one, control the money in this country and in most countries around the world.
And the presidents of the United States who've tried to change that seem to end up dead, right?
Well, you quoted Abraham Lincoln, and indeed he was issuing treasury notes. That was where the term greenback came from. We know what happened to him, and we also know what happened to JFK, who started issuing silver-backed red bills. And they're very rare, but they're still out there to collectors. They did $5 and $2 bills, Executive Order 1110. That's four ones and zero. If anybody wants to look it up, signed by Kennedy, which was going to confront the Federal Reserve bankers. And of course, we know how that story ended up too.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Explain this idea of debt slavery. What is their objective in terms of just the whole system in general? They want us to go through an education system to work for them, and credit is so easily given to everyone, and it seems great. But what's really happening?
Well, the big picture is when you create money out of thin air, when it's based on nothing but our belief that it holds value, it's this whole concept of keeping people in a box, keeping people unaware of the fact that there are alternatives to money. I know we'll get to it later, but just to fast forward to the Utopia section, I'd have a very controversial chapter called The End of Money. Mm-hmm. And I lay out some different concepts and ways that people can think about either changing over to another way of bartering, say, for goods, or even better, I go to Burning Man every year, the gift economy, and just giving it away. And then, we live in such abundance here on this planet. A lot of interviews that I've done, was just on with Richard Syrett a couple nights ago in Canada. He was all on board with Future-Esoteric, but the one chapter he really couldn't wrap his head around was this end of money. And just trying to say, we live in a land of abundance. If there was a new way to conceptualize living without having to be a debt slave, to create these Federal Reserve notes that we need to survive, we could really uplift humanity in a major way. And the example I pointed out to him is in the TV show and the movie Star Trek, you will never see in a single scene the use of money. Yeah. And just keep in mind, this is supposed to be humans 300 years in our future. Mm-hmm. And there's some interesting backstory on how Gene Roddenberry, the creator, came up with all that. And it was basically he was sitting in on these seance sessions, or they were sitting in on these Council of Nine who were communicating with humans in our future. Wow. And here's Gene Roddenberry sitting in the back corner sketching down ideas for his future show.
God, I wonder why it was so popular. Jeez.
Maybe we see a little bit of ourselves in there, and what we aspire to be. Wouldn't we want to be a Star Trek future where we're just exploring the cosmos in a peaceful way? And what's also interesting is that in Star Trek, they have this concept that we're not meant to interfere with evolving cultures. The prime directive, it's called. And that is a real, true law in the cosmos, which I do bring up in the cosmos section of Future-Esoteric. And that is why the benevolent ETs cannot and do not and will not interfere in a very direct manner. That's why we don't have the landing on the White House lawn and all these things that people use to say, well, if they're here, why don't they just show themselves? They don't want to. To us, we're like the planet of the apes down here. We still have ways of destroying humanity in this planet, and we just haven't really grown up enough for them to really accept us. Hopefully someday when we do, and let's hope it's in our lifetime, it will be the greatest day in humanity when we can make this meaningful contact.
Yeah, I once heard Dr. Wayne Dyer, who's a brilliant man, say that his parenting style was non-interference, and that is the best way to raise children in terms of letting them learn on their own. We give them direction, but we try our best to let them learn on their own. If we helicopter parenting doesn't seem to be the healthiest version, and if you take that from a cosmic level, it seems like that's what's happening here. And of course, that would be a universal law to let our species, let us beat the hell out of each other and let us, almost kill ourselves in a sense with nuclear power, and so that we can transcend it. And it does seem like, even though we talk about this story, even of the cabal, and, as we're going to get into it more, in some ways it almost seems like it's supposed to happen, because each of us has an Illuminati that exists within us, in terms of we all have that part of us, the dark side, the light side, and we struggle with where to choose it. And then on a bigger story that's happening here. And I brought up Cabal, I brought up Illuminati. Who is behind this banking system? Who are these people? I mean, people don't know. People think, oh man, there's no way that this was organized by a small group of people. It's too big. How could it be planned out? It's just organically happening. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, I do get into it a bit more in the predecessor book, Modern Esoteric, about the 13 bloodline families. And Leo gets into it a lot more in his Confessions of an Illuminati series. It's very complicated. It's also very detailed.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But to synthesize it all, we're talking about a certain group of people who may be even a little bit different than us physically and certainly mentally. They feel like it is their divine right to rule, as the kings of Europe used to always say, and as the Queen of England still maintains to this day, that these are certain individuals who feel like we're either not mature enough to make our own minds up, or that they just want to retain the power to control the world. And for a large part, they've been successful for many generations. And we're talking about hundreds of years, and we can trace them back to the Medici families of Italy during the Renaissance, these early banking families, and even before that to the Knights Templar, who had amassed a huge amount of power and wealth, were suppressed, but then they went underground, and then they reemerged as the Freemasons, a secret society that remains with us today. You don't hear much about it. You hardly ever hear about it in the media or anywhere else. So they're certainly part of this alternative narrative about this control group who seeks to maintain this iron grip control. Well, cracks are forming right now, and now we have the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa is the acronym for BRICS, who are going straight up against the central bankers as we speak and creating a gold-based economy in Shanghai, where the first BRICS central bank is about to open. And when it does, we're going to see some major fireworks in the financial realm, which could very well lead to a dollar collapse. So I do caution people, we need to be prepared, and we need to look at things like what is happening in Venezuela right now. Supermarket shelves barren. The ones that do have supplies have armed guards. And it would be naive to think it couldn't happen here.
Exactly. In fact, when you look at the system in general, it literally doesn't seem sustainable at all. I mean, even for very much longer, when you look at how the Federal Reserve has pretty much just left the interest rate the same. Most of the financial experts are kind of boggled by it. It's almost like they're trying to just hold this thing off for as long as they can until, an inevitable collapse of epic proportions, which the irony is for those who hear that probably have fear come into their heart, especially because it would be such a drastic change to what we're living. I mean, we have a whole society based on convenience, and God, we are addicted to it like crack cocaine. And the idea of a collapse would be quite a shock to our system. But what is the good news behind a collapse like that?
Right. Well, the good news is clearly the system that we live in is corrupt, is very unfair, favors the rich above all. I mean, the middle class in this country is shrinking. The lower class is increasing. You have a lot of people that live with a lot of pain. I see it every day. I see homeless people on the rise here in San Francisco, one of the richest cities in this country, and people that just can't even feed themselves on a daily basis. So I make it a habit to try to give a little change or a buck or two to some homeless people that I see on a daily basis here. I just feel bad for them. It just doesn't mean anything. But it's this concept of the gift economy. Little things that we can do, I think, make a big difference. Mm-hmm. But to answer your question more specifically, we are coming to a fore that this system of financial tyranny, there's really no better way of calling it, is coming to an end. And when it comes to an end, it's obviously going to create a lot of disruption, maybe even more pain for especially the least prepared. But the big picture is you have to destroy the old to bring in the new. Mm-hmm. And I think in the larger picture, if there was a way to create a fair system, even collapse the dollar to get rid of the Federal Reserve. I know they're going to have contingency plans for that, and they don't want to give up their control of our currency, which, by the way, most of the Federal Reserve governors, we don't even know their names, but the ones we do, some of them live in Europe and are not even Americans. So, I mean, the system, when you learn about it, and I do outline it in Future-Esoteric as well as Modern Esoteric, because it's such an important subject. I never repeat my information, but there's just different ways of looking at it. Mm-hmm. And all of it leads to the consequences and the situation that we find ourselves in today. So it's very important to understand the secrets that drive these control groups.
Absolutely. One of those secrets, I guess it's not really much of a secret anymore, is this idea of the military-industrial complex, which has been, I don't know, it's almost like the business model of these guys. And I wanted to share a quote that you have in the book from Dwight D. Eisenhower, President of the United States. And he says, "In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together." And again, this is coming from a guy who made his career in the military, and for him to be saying, post World War II, wait a minute, what the heck's going on here? Like, there's some nefarious forces within our government that are trying to keep us in this perpetual loop of war.
Yeah.
So I ask you, can you explain how this business model of the military-industrial complex works? I would love for you to talk kind of about false flag events and how do they generate this whole storyline so that we're constantly in these altercations and somehow everyone buys into it and people sign up for the military to go fight in these things. And how, can you explain it to us?
Absolutely. What's very interesting that Eisenhower gave that talk, the very most famous speech he ever gave, when Kennedy had already been elected. He was already working with John F. Kennedy and briefing him on how the mechanizations of government and this behemoth military-industrial complex has pretty much taken over the government in many different ways. Again, it's very complex, but if we can break it down into its usury group, just remember, right now, the only real profitable industry that's left in America is arms and equipment manufacturing for the military and for war. In this day and age, we should be so beyond that. There should be no war anymore. I mean, we're smarter than that. We can bring ourselves together. We can think globally. So when you really get down to it.
Well, when you consider, by the way, when kids from all over the world are playing video games with each other, I mean, you're talking about literally all from all over the world. It almost makes you think like, wait a minute, why do we ever go to war? I mean, when you every Iranian person I've ever met, regular citizen, they're like these amazing people. What a beautiful world they come from. What a beautiful culture they've created. And yet you're like, wait a minute, isn't this the country that wants to kill the world, or whatever the hell the propaganda that we get fed?
Well, that ties in nicely to what I was going to say about false flags. And the tricks that are used by world manipulators include this Hegelian dialect. this problem, reaction, solution, and these false dichotomies whereby a problem is created to push into accepting a rigged solution. Incidents such as the multiple attacks on 9/11, Sandy Hook as being a FEMA drill that went live, and the Boston bombings, just to name a few, were all engineered by the shadow government to justify the further removal of freedoms from the population to keep us safe. But ultimately, liberty traded for security always leads to slavery. So this is a terrible course that we're going down. And as someone who believes in the nonviolent principles of Martin Luther King and Gandhi, the only thing we can do is just drop a truth bomb on them, like I just said, and to expose their mode of operation. We cannot go up against them fire with fire. We will get destroyed. We don't have the weapons, and it's the wrong approach. The only thing we can do is just talk about these things and make people aware that this is how they do their bidding, and this is how we stop it. We just do not engage with this terrible system that keeps us in this perpetual state of fear. And that's the key to it. If we can break that state of fear, then we can just step back and look at these things for the way they really are. And it's quite a good thing that once you awaken to this deception, you can use it as a tool for raising your own consciousness. It literally becomes your power. Because in the end, the idea that virtually everything is fake around us can be really empowering rather than depressing. But we have to get to this step first, that we see all this fakery in our society today.
Why do you think it's so hard for people to accept? I mean, it's almost like they feel like their whole life is a lie, and it's almost too much to bear. It's almost like they glitch out, and almost like it's. I mean, we've all experienced people where you try to go to a certain subject with someone, and then they almost get like aggressive to get to no, I don't talk about it, and they just want to leave leave the situation. Something emotional is struck in them. What do you think that? Where is that stemming from?
Well, that's stemming from cognitive dissonance, and that is basically when you're confronted with a subject that goes against your core beliefs, such as America is a great country and their government would never do anything, and we're democratically elected and the people are in charge, and which in a perfect world that would be the case. But you see, the real world is so much different than the lies that we have been fed for generations that it really becomes hard to tell the difference anymore. Something I'm going to talk about in my talk at Contact in the Desert is that we've been kept in a prison of the mind, and I'll put that in quotes, a prison of the mind for all of our lives. We can call this Plato's cave, and this was an allegory Plato used to compare the effect of education and the lack of it on our nature. So Plato's cave has effectively constrained our access to information until we can no longer tell fact from fiction or reality from fantasy. And you brought up video games. Why do you think they're so popular? Or movies with superheroes in them? It's just that everything in our society is fake today. And we just have to step back from all this and realize what these control mechanisms are and how they operate, until we can really see that so many things here have just been manipulated to keep us in this box, in this Plato's cave.
Absolutely. One, probably the greatest tool that this group who's of the controllers, the powers that be, or as you say in your book, the powers that were, which is badass, by the way. Thank you for saying that. David Wilcock says that too, and I think it's awesome. Is the media. Yep. And this is their ultimate arm of manipulation. This is their most powerful tool in terms of putting us in this state of mind. And you have a part of your book that I wanted to share, and it goes like this: mainstream news comes from biased sources, both in the choice of what is aired and the spin placed on the information. Mainstream media either knowingly or by rationalization distorts its reporting when the event is perceived as a threat to the moneyed interests. The guardians of our constitutional freedom of speech and freedom of the press have been bought. Bedrock principles of our democracy are compromised every day on TV, newspapers, and radio. Instead, what we have is a news system that panders to the interest of America's privileged and neglects its duty to objectively inform the public. Can you, put on your Revolutionary War hat? What is the importance of the press? Is it? Some might just think it's just another aspect, but how vital truly is the press? I mean, and that's what we're doing right here. I mean, this is what lordsofconsciousness.com is a small, tiny drop in the pond of alternative media. That what is the purpose of it?
Well, I'm very appreciative of what you guys do, because this is what it's going to take. And this is what a lot of people just can't wrap their head around, that the media can actually lie to the people. Just keep in mind that 6 corporations own the vast majority of all the media outlets in this country. The big news media stories are vetted, cut, and shaped the way the corporate leaders see fit. We learned all about this when Operation Mockingbird was revealed, that they have had plants in the media since the 1950s, probably much earlier. They have been monitoring and they've been killing stories that, for example, anything that has to do with UFOs, or they'll just turn it around and make it look like everybody who saw it was some kind of crock pot, was having some mass hallucination or whatever. But the reality is there is nothing balanced, impartial, or fair about the mainstream media news anymore. In the U.S. and Australia and many Western nations, the news is dominated by a handful of for-profit corporations who are legally bound to provide a return on investment to their shareholders. Okay, so despite the glaring inconsistencies, contradictions, and security failures that seem too unlikely to be believable, the mainstream media never asks questions or investigates anymore. It merely reports as fact whatever the authorities say. And you really have to think about this deeply to comprehend that we are being fed information that this exact same elite core group of people that want to control us are putting out there. This is their narrative, okay? And to combat that, we have to be able to think very critically about these things. And this means we have to understand that running news pieces which either promote the agenda of the corporate owners, especially the military agenda, and I'm so glad you brought that up early on because it really all does tie back into this, or censoring stories that would hurt political advertisers or even their advertisers, such as Big Pharma, who is the biggest contributor of funds for advertising on mainstream media. Even according to former U.S. Senator Robert Kennedy Jr., his son, which is big on this, and I quote in Future-Esoteric, especially about vaccines, and we can talk about some of that stuff.
By the way, thank you for turning me on to him. I read about him in the book, and what a guy, man. So thank you. Keep going. Sorry.
No, not at all. And he's great. And, people have asked him, why don't you run for public office? And he said, well, I saw what happened to my dad and my uncle. And it's a dangerous place to be for a Kennedy, I would say, especially one that tells the truth.
Oh, yeah.
But just finally, to finish up, additionally, the news is literally fake. I just want people to understand that. Remember how CNN green screen stunt during the Iraqi war? That was, they're reporting live from the scene, and they're in a studio in Atlanta, Georgia, where they pretended they were being bombed in Saudi Arabia, but in reality, they were just in a studio. So when we it's again like the Wizard of Oz. When you see the old man behind the curtain, the magician's trick doesn't work anymore. When you see how they're doing their little trick up their sleeve, you never can see that illusion again, because that's what it is. Mm-hmm. We are being fed this illusionary world that they want us to think we should be fearful and afraid, where really it's a beautiful world out there, and there's so much to be thankful for, and just go out and breathe the fresh air and,
absolutely.
and be alive.
Absolutely.
Thing I want to say about the media that I've always found very interesting is BBC on 9/11 showing Tower 7 falling before it fell. That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And anybody that hasn't seen that, just look it up, YouTube it. It's Tower 7 BBC. Yep. They show it minutes before it falls. I mean, how is that possible that they report it? And you can see it in the background.
And they pulled it, didn't they? I mean,
they pulled it.
Yeah, unbelievable. And
unfortunately, there are records of it existing, and as you said, you can find it very easily.
Yep.
You know what's so very interesting, and I always say, what is not being said also speaks volume. And what was never said in the 9/11 Commission report, I call it the omission report. What never was said once was any mention of Building 7 coming down. How could they miss that?
Yep.
It's just crazy. So yeah, when you start seeing through it, it's all just an avalanche of lies, really.
Well, I didn't want to go down too many rabbit holes, but let's talk about Building 7 really quick, just to explain what a vital part of, of the false flag that it was. There's reports that there were things being stored in that building, including, I believe it was gold. What do you know much about it, Brad, in terms of what?
I think that was actually Building 6. A lot of people don't realize there was even a fourth building that was completely eviscerated, and that is Building 6, where a lot of this gold, which, by the way, was meant to be collected under a lawsuit and given back to China that day.
That's
what
right.
a coincidence.
Wow.
Oh, shoot. 9/11 happened. All the gold's gone. Sorry, China.
And this was
back on that lawsuit.
And this was the gold that was taken by the Japanese in World War II, correct? Do you know much about that?
Right. Well, that's along the lines of Ben Fulford and David Wilcock, and I do follow their work. They have information on a lot of gold off the record that is still stored in the Philippines and Indonesia and some other places. And some of that may have made it here. And then there's this whole thing about these gold certificate records were huge amounts of dollars being traded and falsely collected. And even there was this great big arrest on the Italian border where some Japanese were trying to bring in some of these bond certificates for gold, and they go back to like the 1920s and 30s and stuff. So it's you're right. It's a rabbit hole that could probably take up the whole time of this show.
Exactly. I wanted to, exactly. But it's something that is worth looking into for anyone listening. Every single thing that we're talking about, there's volumes of material on every single topic we're talking about. So this is a great opportunity to kind of paint the big picture, and hopefully people will start, digging deeper, you've spent hours and hours and hours and thousands of hours probably just digging into each of these. You started this book in 2008, correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
And it took till 2012 to get it out, and then the second edition was working on that, and that just came out last month.
So cool, man. So cool.
I just bought the second edition today.
Yeah.
I saw that. I was just like, ooh, second edition.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I wanted to talk about I wanted to share a quote that you have in your book. Sorry, I'm trying to pull it up. That it was a part of your book that really blew me away, that I really was unaware of, in terms of the influence that the Nazis have had within our own borders. Okay,
right.
And it was the title of the chapter is called the Fourth Reich in America, I believe.
Yeah.
And I wanted to read this part of it just to kind of get it going. The financial assistance of Wall Street in Germany's post-World War I rebuilding in the 1920s is legendary. Many well-known American corporations invested in Germany and inadvertently aided the subsequent financing and technological footing for World War II. These companies included General Electric, Standard Oil, ITT, Ford, General Motors, Chase, and Manhattan banks, and the Rockefeller and JP Morgan interests, among others. Investors and governments in the West were interested in German industry before, during, and after the Nazi era. This made for a sometimes easy transfer of post-war assets, secret technology, and personnel when the skills of a former Nazi were desired. You literally just blew me away with this entire chapter of this book. Can you go into this and kind of give us an overview of how Nazism never really died, and we just got rid of the name. Germany was the only one that really surrendered, and kind of take it to how they've infiltrated our own country here in the United States. I mean,
Sure.
really throughout the world.
Yeah, it's the greatest story never told, at least in the 20th century. That first of all, the Third Reich never surrendered after World War II. Germany surrendered, but the Third Reich never did, and that was the government and the political apparatus that maintained the whole German army, which was also Austria, Hungary, several other countries that they annexed. Third Reich went underground and became the Fourth Reich. And we had this policy right after World War II, actually even during, to acquire the mines that America felt it needed to have to compete with the Russians, who were also doing it. And the British were also doing it. Although the British were more of our allies in this, America got the most amount of scientists as well as people who became instrumental in creating the CIA and the NSA. They were all acquired in this program called Project Paperclip. And these former Nazis were not put on trial at Nuremberg with some of their other compatriots, who many received the death penalty. And some of these Project Paperclip Nazis should have been at Nuremberg and should have received the death penalty for some of the slave labor operations they did, as well as the spying apparatus, which one very high-ranking Nazi named Reinhard Gehlen, he came over here, he was given immunity, and he was pretty instrumental in starting up what is now known as the CIA. A lot of people don't even know this, that
Wow.
the Nazi infestation begins at the very early years. And all of this now has blown up to huge proportions with the Snowden revelations that the NSA has been spying on us all along. You know, the NSA wasn't even recognized until the 1980s. They were so deeply embedded underground that a lot of people said NSA stood for no such agency. And they still remain highly secretive to this day. And it's only when they get completely busted on things like the Snowden revelations do they have to make mention of what they're up to. But they have created such a way of being invisible to government agencies and anybody who's trying to get information on them, that they have laws that prevent anybody from seeing what they're really up to. So the way that they've embedded themselves, and this goes real deep, and one of the things I'll be talking about at Contact in the Desert, how it relates to the secrecy of UFO and ET relations, is that they have made it so nobody can access the records. Nobody can access data or information. Even the President of the United States is kind of like a mid-level operative in this pyramid, which begs a question: who then is really in charge? And who is responsible and who is culpable for some of the things they're up to? And you just keep hitting a brick wall after brick wall. So they've maintained their level of secrecy to a very high degree in this country and truly around the world. Part of the narrative of the Fourth Reich in America is that the very top Nazi, Adolf Hitler, did not die in the bunkers. And there are reports on the FBI Vault website, which is declassifying documents, that he landed in Argentina only a few months after the end of World War II, along with the money man, Martin Bormann, who was the number 2 Nazi who controlled all the wealth of the Third Reich. And so when you have those two things, when you have an underground government which is now manipulating other governments Argentina, US, and others with the money that was pilfered out of Europe. And just remember, it's not just the gold, but many priceless works of art have never been seen again. It begs the question, where did all this money go? What was it used for? And isn't it interesting now that Germany is the powerhouse of Europe, is about the only country that's not totally in debt and is like financing this EU, which, what do you know? It's the whole Third Reich. They control Europe, but now it's the Fourth Reich underground using these different government mechanizations.
It's unbelievable. Again, when I first read that part of the book, it just blew me away. That I'm to be honest with you, I'm so grateful for the men and women who've spent, I mean, probably decades just to try to unveil this information. You know, putting this information probably didn't come from just one person. It came from, I don't know how many, you tell me, but many people were putting puzzle pieces together. You know, even what was it? Wasn't there a woman who came out and said that she had spotted Adolf Hitler in the 1950s and things like that. And people who've really stuck their neck out there and were courageous enough to continue to keep going and finding what's behind the secrets. And this, you know, as you mentioned, how they remain so hidden. I'm just these people to me are patriots, I guess you'd say, and you know, we owe them a debt of gratitude. And you know, even you, who's put this book out in terms of compiling all this information into where people like you and David Icke can now surmise a huge picture, and really we can start seeing the lay of the land. You know, now we kind of do have a map of what the heck's going on, and it's really just really incredible. We're going to wrap this episode up and then start again on the other side, and we really want to hit on the other two pillars of your book. So we're going to cut it here just so we're going to keep it at a 1 hour each. But we'll get you on the other side. So I'm going to end the audio here. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Lords of Consciousness podcast, where Brad breaks down, you know, the extraterrestrial connection to all of this, which Richie over here is licking his chops. And my favorite part, the utopia. So thank you, Brad.